We begin today with the laws of political gravity having their way with Team Trump and Elon Musk as they gut the federal workforce and destroy decades of work in promoting democratic values all around the world. Brand new polling shows the bottom falling out of Elon Musk's approval ratings among the American people, as the bottom also falls out of sales at his prized car company, Tesla. A review of polls by the New York Times shows that while more voters agree than disagree with the idea that government is inefficient and wasteful by a margin of 14 points, and voters like the idea of DOGE by a margin of 6 points, they do not at all approve of the job that Elon Musk and DOGE are doing. And they disapprove of Elon Musk being in the federal government even more. According to a Quinnipiac poll, 57% of voters think Elon Musk has too much power in the federal government. That includes 16% of Republicans. Elon Musk has said he will spend less time in Washington in the wake of Tesla's shocking 71% collapse in profits. But whatever happens with Elon, we may be living with the effects of the things he's already done in the category of slashing and burning the federal government for a very long time. Two of Elon Musk's biggest and earliest targets, the U.S. State Department and USAID. USAID has largely been dissolved, and they are slated for more changes. New York Times reports this, quote, the cuts will affect the work of embassies and consulates overseas. Closures of diplomatic missions and layoffs abroad are expected later. That's according to U.S. officials in earlier leaked memos. The most dramatic change, the elimination of the Office of the Undersecretary for Civilian Security, Democracy, and Human Rights, which is charged with advancing American values around the world. Many now fear that the gutting of the office, especially after months of criticizing our allies and embracing autocrats like Vladimir Putin, by doing that, the Trump administration is completing a 180-degree turn away from promoting the values that have helped define the U.S. around the world. Michael Crowley reports this in today's New York Times, quote, Rubio's critics say the clear message is that those values are being downgraded, breaking with decades of American diplomatic tradition. Eliminating the State Department's senior-most human rights official sends a clear signal that the Trump administration cares less about fundamental freedoms than it does about cutting deals with autocrats and tyrants. That's according to Christopher Lamont, who served as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor in the Biden administration. Many of these critics point out that the State Department's Human Rights Office did a lot of important work in Republican administrations as well, including in the last Trump administration. After all, promoting democracy and human rights was and is a bipartisan issue. Just ask Marco Rubio.
I think of critical importance, of eternal importance, and that's the issue of human rights. I think as Americans, we have to always remind ourselves that our nation was actually founded on the principles of human rights. To me, human rights is critical both to our national identity, but it's also important to our national security. And one of the topics that I hope young Americans will learn more about is the state of affairs across the world when it comes to human rights. It's just a reminder of how we need to continue to be a nation that supports those who speak out for the principles of free speech and human rights and respect for rule of law.
Make no mistake, we could have gone on and on and on, but we won't. That was U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The gutting of the State Department, and with it a retreat from the values that define the country all around the world, is where we start today. New York Times diplomatic correspondent Michael Crowley joins us. Also joining us is Andrew Nassios. He was the administrator of USAID during the George W. Bush presidency. He's now an executive professor at Texas A&M University. And with me at the table, staff writer for The Atlantic, author of the brand new book, The Project, How Project 2025 is Reshaping America. David Graham joins us. Michael Crowley, take me through what you're reporting.
Well, you know, the State Department had so far escaped the blade of DOGE and the cutting of the bureaucracy that has been such a high priority of the Trump administration. Of course, USAID was dismantled and closed down, but although it was sort of a sibling of the State Department, it was not within the State Department. So Marco Rubio now has unveiled his reorganization plan for the State Department. And, basically, what Rubio says he's doing is streamlining, consolidating, making it more efficient and effective. I think what really jumps out are two things. One, the part of the reorganization that you mentioned, which is eliminating this division. It's one of 6. They call them undersecretariats. They're undersecretaries of state for things like management, public diplomacy, arms control. This was the undersecretariat for basically protecting people and promoting democracy. So human rights, democracy, civilian protection, and overseeing, and that office oversees, several bureaus that work on those particular issues, including ones with a close focus on human rights, one that issues the State Department's annual human rights report. And that's very troubling to people who believe that it's consistent with the Trump administration's devaluation of human rights in U.S. foreign policy, and particularly rankles people who have followed Senator Rubio's career, who, as you demonstrated, has long expressed strong interest in human rights and democracy promotion. Now, in fairness, what the State Department is saying is that those programs will continue, but they're being merged and moved around, and that this will be more efficient and effective. That's their line. A lot of people are very skeptical of that. The one other thing I would add, Nicole, about yesterday's rollout that was interesting was just the tone that Rubio took. When Rubio first took the job, even a lot of senior people in the State Department under Secretary of State Blinken and the Biden administration felt like, it could have been a lot worse from our perspective. They think of Rubio as a responsible guy who will be a good steward of the State Department. And on his first day, in remarks to State Department employees, Rubio was quite complimentary of their work and saying that he wanted them to have a bigger role in making foreign policy. But the tone he took yesterday was quite critical, saying that the State Department was bloated, had become a hotbed of a radical political ideology, and seemed in some ways, I think, contemptuous in a way that upset a lot of Foreign Service officers who were wondering, where's the Rubio that we used to know? So a lot will depend on the implementation. We can talk more about that, but those are the big top lines I'm seeing right now. A lot of frustration within the Foreign Service and people who used to know what they feel was a different Senator Rubio.
Here's a tweet from former Congressman Tom Malinowski, who led the Human Rights Office. When I ran the State Department's Human Rights Bureau, few senators were more interested in our work than Marco Rubio. If I'd purged from our annual reporting references to stolen elections in Venezuela or unjust imprisonment in China, he'd have called for my resignation. The State Department is required by law to issue these annual public reports on human rights violations for every country. They are supposed to be full and complete, covering every major category of human rights abuse, including prolonged detention without charges. The point is to force us to be honest about the foreign governments we're dealing with, so that if the president wants to sell arms to a foreign country or have a chummy relationship with its leader, he can't deny it's torturing prisoners or refusing to hold free elections. Marco Rubio isn't just putting a different spin on some bureaucratic structuring of a federal agency. His whole reason for being in the U.S. Senate is the very kinds of things that he's now turning his back on. What is the theory about how far Marco Rubio is willing to go to keep his job?
Yeah, well, Nicole, a working theory, which I can't tell you is definitely true, but would be consistent with the evidence we're seeing, is that Marco Rubio felt like to get this job and now to hold this job, he was going to have to become MAGA, certainly more MAGA than he had been traditionally. Again, he was a pretty mainstream guy. I mean, he irritated Democrats who saw him as a partisan, and he took shots at them that they thought were cheap. But really, especially after he was appointed or nominated to be Secretary of State, I heard from very senior people in the diplomatic world, look, he's basically a responsible guy. He's been on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senate Intelligence Committee. He'll be a good steward. And I think what you hear those same people saying now is that they're realizing Rubio understands that to survive in Trump's orbit, he just can't be that person. That he'll be pushed out of his job. He'll be fired. He'll be the next Rex Tillerson. And moreover, he's not only looking to the present potentially, but looking to the future. Remember, Marco Rubio is a man who ran for president, and there's no one that I'm aware of who's run for president once who doesn't think that they should have won and, you know, probably could do it again successfully. So he's very likely thinking about another run and thinking about how does his tenure in this job look to Trump's base, to the Republican Party, to MAGA world. And I think to thrive in that sense, he's got to go after the targets that resonate in that world. So that's less about striking big deals, I think, than, you know, a little bit of slash and burn, a little bit vitriol, owning the libs. And the talk about human rights and democracy promotion just doesn't serve those purposes for him right now. So that's the working theory, and I think all the evidence is lining up with it right now.
Andrew Natsios, I'm old enough, as are you, to remember when promoting democratic values was a key pillar of U.S. national security in the wake of the deadly terror attack of September 11th, 2001. Surely Marco Rubio is aware of that history.
If you look at President Bush 43's second inaugural address, it was all about democracy. In fact, it's probably the strongest statement for democracy around the world since Woodrow Wilson. So it has been part of the Republican platform for a very long time until now. I think the focus in this discussion is almost entirely on Marco Rubio. I don't think Marco Rubio is making these decisions. These decisions are being made in the White House.